Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Mind's Eye. Thank you all for tuning in. So I got a little bit of a different thing I want to talk about today, and this goes off the poll that I just posted yesterday. And at the time that I recorded this video, I think I had 10 or 11 responses on that poll. But I asked, what do you think is the most important track on an album? And the options I gave were the opening track, the second track, the B-side opener, the closer, or kind of like a fifth option for you to tell me if you have a different opinion. I chose those 4 specific tracks for a reason, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But getting into this, I've always been sort of fascinated with the way that albums are sequenced and the way that they flow. Ever since I can remember, being like a little 5, 6, 7-year-old, before I was even into rock music, I remember one of my favorite pastimes was to take my like little kid tapes or like the Christmas music that we had and make my own mixtapes and compilations from it. And I was like obsessed with finding just like the right order to make it flow and fit how I wanted it to go. And that kind of carried into me becoming a big fan of rock and metal. I love making playlists and mixtapes and mix CDs all the way back since I got into this kind of music. And I don't know, there's just something about the way that albums flow together I think can really make or break an album sometimes. And I was thinking of all the really kind of unique ways that some albums can go together. And what brought this on, I was listening to Precious Time by Pat Benatar yesterday. And this is the first time I've ever actually listened to this album from start to finish. All the hit songs are like right there at the front with Promises in the Dark, Fire and Ice, Precious Time, all really good songs. So I was kind of expecting there to be a little bit of a downgrade on the B-side, I guess. But I didn't feel that way at all, because the B-side opened up with It's a Tough Life and Take It Any Way You Want It. Prisoner of Love there at track 9 is really good too. And I thought, how important is it for the B-side to open up that strongly with 2 tracks that I really took to? Especially Take It Any Way You Want It. I don't think I've ever heard that song before, but I loved it, and it was just one of those songs that grabbed me, and it was awesome. So I got to thinking about the way that albums flow together, and obviously the opening track is a very important song. You want to start the album off on the right foot. You want to draw the audience in. You want to catch the ear. You want to start off. Usually, you want to start off big, and oftentimes albums will come in with like a big rock, anthemic, heavy, some sort of big introduction to the album. And in many ways, though the opening track is where you want to set the tone, I think in many ways it doesn't always set the tone. I think its prime purpose is to draw you in. And the reason that I put track 2 on the poll was because I feel like track 2 often really does set the tone for the rest of the album. My primary example for this is the Foo Fighters' Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace, released in 2007. The Pretender was the first single on the album, and it was the opening track. It was the big, heavy rock song that really drew you into the album. Well, there's really no other song on the album that is like The Pretender, but it doesn't feel out of place either. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Let It Die is the second track. Let It Die goes from this ginormous rock song in The Pretender. Let It Die starts off nice and soft and just continuously builds to this big epic rock song at the end of it, where the beginning of the song is nice and soft with a fairly soft acoustic guitar playing a nice little lick, and by the end of the song David Grohl is screaming his head off, "Why'd you have to go and let it die?" And the song ends with David Grohl screaming the word "die." It's just, from Pretender to the beginning of Let It Die is like a nice bait and switch, and then from the beginning of Let It Die to the end is like another bait and switch. And I think that really sets the album up better, because Echoes is a very diverse album with lots of melodic rock songs, acoustic songs, ballads. There's just a little bit of everything on the album, and I think Let It Die is the perfect bridge from The Pretender, which was the big heavy rock single, into the rest of the album, and I think it just works so perfectly. Another thing that I was thinking too, I think it's very interesting when bands put ballads at track number 2. Now, I don't think that is always a good idea. In fact, I kind of think that's like a really dangerous idea sometimes, but when it works, it really works well. And the 2 albums that I think fit that the best is Bon Jovi's The Circle, with When We Were Beautiful being the second track, going from the big anthemic We Weren't Born to Follow to the rest of the album. And I think my favorite thing about The Circle is the sound of the album. It's a very big sound, it's very arena, and despite the fact that When We Were Beautiful was a softer song, it still sounds big, and it builds much the way that Let It Die does. It never really turns into the rock song that Let It Die does, but it doesn't stay soft. And I think that was a great choice for the second track on that album. The other one that I liked was Can't Stop Loving You, is the second track on Balance from Van Halen. You go from, again, the big heavy rock song in The Seventh Seal to a ballad, which is not like a really soft ballad, but it's a very melodic, great guitar work from Eddie, and the sound of that just really it really sets the tone for Balance. I love the guitar tone on Balance, and I love the kind of darker yet clear guitar sound that Eddie has on that album. I think Can't Stop Loving You is a really great way to bring you into that, especially after The Seventh Seal. So that's another instance in where I think that having a ballad at track 2 works pretty well. Now the antithesis of that would be No Jacket Required from Phil Collins. Even though it's not track 2, track 3 is a slow song, and I think it actually kind of ruins the flow of the album. Now, individually, I like every song on No Jacket Required. There's not a song on that album that I think is bad. I don't like the placement of Long Way to Go. Album starts with Sussudio, which is a great introduction to the album. It's a very pop, dance, upbeat record. Sussudio starts it perfectly. Only You Know and I Know is a great momentum track, and what I mean by that is, even though, like, I personally actually prefer Only You Know and I Know to Sussudio, but Sussudio definitely is the momentum builder at track 1, and while You Know and I Know doesn't have the same momentum building qualities Sussudio does, I think it does a great job of keeping the momentum alive, and then it just kind of drops with Long Way to Go. Me personally, and another thing with this is that 2 tracks later you close the A-side on One More Night, which is another soft song. I think those 2 soft songs are too close together at the front of the album. If it were me, I would have put Long Way to Go somewhere on the B-side, and I would have loved to have had like Don't Lose My Number, or maybe bump I Don't Want to Know up to track 3, and still close the A-side out with One More Night, track 5, and then put the other ballad on the other half of the album. That's just me. I love No Jacket Required. I think it's a great album, but personally I would have resequenced it a little bit, because my least favorite part about it is the sequencing of the tracks there. Now, obviously, with Precious Time, you want to start the B-side off on a strong note. You don't want to kind of lose interest on the second half, which I think can happen. So I think it's very important to start the second half off, and you can do it a number of ways. It doesn't always have to be the big anthemic rock song that starts the album or whatever, but you definitely want to keep the interest going into the B-side, especially if you have all your hits front-loaded on the first half of the album. And more often than not, I would say that A-sides tend to be stronger than B-sides. You definitely want to front-load your album with the better songs that are going to hook the listener in. And hit songs are generally piled toward the front of the album as well. So to keep the interest alive, you really want to start the B-side off on a positive note. And I think It's a Tough Life and Take It Any Way You Want It really did that with Precious Time. Especially since none of the songs on the B-side were like big hit songs that I was familiar with, and it really kept my interest going. I really found myself really loving the second half of that album. So you always want to start the second half of the album off on the right foot. And of course, one person did vote for the album closer, which I think is interesting. I kind of wish if whoever voted for the album closer, if you do happen to come across this video and are watching, please let me know why you think that. I'm just kind of curious as to your thoughts behind that, because that's an interesting choice to me. But you're not wrong. I think album closers are very important. I think the mark of a good album is to leave the listener wanting more. And that's also why I prefer shorter albums. Albums that are 30 to 40 minutes in length, to me, that's the sweet spot, maybe up to 45 minutes. Anything longer than that, I kind of feel like the want for me to go back and listen to it again starts to lessen a little bit. I think of big, long albums. One of my favorite examples of a long album is Metallica's Load. I'm a big Load fan. I think that album's fantastic. I like most every song on it. Do I listen to that album back to back to back? Not very often. In fact, I tend to find myself cherry picking Load a lot, but the thing about that is, I mean, it's a 79 or some odd minute. They had to cut time off of the Outlaw Torn because it was too long. So it was like 79 some minutes and some odd seconds. When I listen to Dress to Kill or Fair Warning or some of these other shorter albums, it's like, man, I can't get enough. I listen to it like 8 times in a row just to get my fill. I think that's the mark of a good album. I prefer that, I guess, as opposed to just like the one and done kind of a thing. So the album closer, again, is something I think you want to have a good solid album closer. And there's no wrong answer to any of this. I think album closers, it's nice to end on a big, bright, positive note. Sometimes it's also nice to end on a soft note. I think Dokken, back in their classic albums like Breaking the Chains and Tooth and Nail and Under Lock and Key, they all ended on these big, positive rockin' notes like Paris is Burning, Turn On the Action, and one of my personal favorites, Till the Living End. Absolute barn burners of closing tracks, and I love that. Turn it around to an album like Weathered by Creed, which is actually my favorite Creed album. That album actually ends on a very soft note with the song Lullaby, but I quite like it. I think it's the perfect way to bring that album to a close. So there's no wrong answer. I think that's what's so fun about this, is there's no wrong answer. There's so many different ways that you can build these albums and sequence these albums, and I've always found that quite fascinating. So one of the things I also wanted to bring up is my personal favorite album, There's Nothing Left to Lose by the Foo Fighters. It's not the only album in my collection where I would say I love every song, but it's my favorite album, and it's been my favorite album since I bought it in 2006. So what about that album separates it from the rest of the pack, even albums that are built in a similar way? The album, and kind of talking more like CDs here, CDs tend to start off strong or end strong. I think very rarely is the real meat of the album like in the middle. And There's Nothing Left to Lose, at least to me, starts and ends as strong as anything. Stacked Actors is a great heavy rock track to kick things off. Breakout is a fun upbeat rock song. Learn to Fly was the pop radio hit single, and that's fantastic. That's a great way to start the album. I also really like the last 2 tracks, Ain't It the Life and MIA, just kind of a nice melodic way to cap the album off. But right in the middle is like where all my favorite songs on that album are. A lot of the underrated ones: Gimme Stitches, Generator, Aurora, Living Skin, which I think is super underrated. Next Year, Headwires. I love those tracks. So it's got an album that starts and ends very like as strong as anything, but the middle is just so strong that it just kind of like overwhelms any other album to me. And not many albums really have that flow. I think the only other 2 examples I can think of would be Van Halen 2, where you start off, again, I like every song on Van Halen 2. You start off with the cover song You're No Good and the pop song Dance the Night Away. You close with 2 little softer songs like Women in Love and the poppier Beautiful Girls. But right in the middle is where you have like the real meat of the album, like Somebody Get Me a Doctor, which is super heavy. Bottoms Up, Out of Love Again, Light Up the Sky, which is a barn burner. Spanish Fly, which I love. DOA. So right in the middle of the album, you kind of have like the real strength of the album. And another one that I was thinking of, and this one actually just occurred to me before I started this video, and I was trying to organize my thoughts, but Test for Echo from Rush. Yes, I do like Test for Echo. I do like Driven. I do like Carve Away the Stone. But my favorite tracks on the album: Half the World, Color of Right, Totem. I even am quite fond of Dog Ears, which may be unpopular, but I think that's a fun track as well. Virtuality. You got a lot of strong songs right there in the middle of that album, and I love Test for Echo. It's one of my favorite latter period Rush albums. So it's just an interesting concept. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. What are some albums that you think are wonderfully sequenced? What are some albums that you think were great but should have been sequenced a different way? What do you think is like the most important song? Any thoughts that you have on this whole subject, I'm interested to hear, because this is something that's always been sort of fascinating to me. So if you like this kind of content, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future, and I'll catch you next time.